Nickelodeon is back. Sort of. Hey everyone, Ryan Reed here, and I know it's been a few days since I uploaded, but I wanted to come back from a little bit of a break and talk about a documentary I saw a few weeks ago called The Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story. And if you haven't heard of this documentary, I honestly wouldn't be too surprised. I'm a pretty major Nickelodeon, 90s Nickelodeon specifically, fan, and I hadn't heard of this documentary. The only way I had heard of it was from a podcast I listened to called the Big Orange Couch Podcast, which, if you are a Nickelodeon fan and you have not listened to the Big Orange Couch Podcast, I highly recommend it. It's hosted by two friends named Andrew and Joey, and they have rotating guests of their friends and other people who come on, talk about programs from the 90s, the 90s Nickelodeon specifically, as well as some other things occasionally. And it's just a really, really great podcast, so if you're a fan of this stuff like I am, I highly recommend checking it out. But on one of their episodes, I think in December, they had briefly mentioned that there was a documentary out called The Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story. And I think it came out in November, if I remember correctly. But it had just completely flown by me. I hadn't heard of this documentary. I didn't know it was coming out. And so hearing about that, I quickly looked it up and rented it. You can rent it on like Amazon and, Microsoft Store and all that stuff. And decided to check it out. And I will say, for a 90s Nickelodeon fan like myself, I highly recommend this documentary to other people who enjoy that particular era of programming. The cool thing about this documentary is it doesn't just focus on the things that you would expect. They don't spend a ton of time just, exclusively talking about the Nicktoons, although that is there. All the things that a lot of people associate with 90s Nickelodeon are there, but what they really do with this documentary is break down where Nickelodeon came from. They talk about the development from the channel it originally was called Pinwheel in like the 70s and 80s, all the way to becoming Nickelodeon, to kind of getting its feet in the late 80s, early 90s, and all the way through the 90s. And it's a really cool documentary to see develop. So if you're really looking for something that focuses on like the actors from Nickelodeon, they're not the main focus, although they are there. If you're looking for something that really talks to a lot of the creators from Nickelodeon, again, not the main focus, although there are some really interesting interviews. It really looks at how this channel evolved into a phenomenon and how it had such a major influence on people of my generation and the importance of it and how it kind of shaped what kind of entertainment we watch and what we find funny and all kinds of stuff. So it's a really, really, really cool documentary diving into where this channel came from. They really spend a lot of time interviewing people who ran the channel and who developed programming and a lot of the kind of behind the scenes stuff. Yes, there are some great interviews with people like Mark Summers and with people like Kenan Thompson and Kel Mitchell and Jim Jenkins, who created Doug, is interviewed and all kinds of stuff. But it's really all the behind the scenes stuff, where things came from, how ideas came about, that to me were most fascinating, because a lot of that is the stuff I didn't know. They also spend a lot of time talking about shows that you wouldn't think they would, but had a major, major impact on the channel, and so they dedicate a lot of time to that. Like You Can't Do That on Television, which was, a Canadian show that they took in. It wasn't even a Nickelodeon original, but it shaped Nickelodeon as a whole so much, and, the slime and just kind of the attitude of the channel. They also spend a lot of time talking about Hey Dude, which, although if you're like me as a kid, you probably were like meh on Hey Dude. Like when it was on, you were like, I guess I'll watch this. But they talk about why that show was important and why that show was developed, and it gave me a totally different appreciation for that particular program. There's a lot of stuff that they dive into here, and yes, they do spend some time talking about Rugrats and Rocco and Doug and all the Nicktoons and all that, and where all these ideas came from. But I think that would be my one big complaint with the documentary, is that it's not long enough, which I know is a weird thing to say, but it really only runs about an hour 40 minutes. I think it's like an hour 42, and unfortunately it's just not enough time. I was really hoping we'd get kind of like a Crystal Lake Memories or a Never Sleep Again style documentary where it's like 4 or 5 hours, because they could spend so much time talking about each individual program and what it means, as well as the development of the channel, as well as the channel outside of the channel itself, in terms of the impact it had on, the merchandise and stuff. And they do dive into all that, but there are just moments where it feels like they kind of fly through things. Like the Rocco segment is super short, and I think, obviously Rocco is still a show that's remembered. It's my favorite Nicktoon, and so I would have liked to see them dive into things a little bit more there. But they do kind of touch on everything. Like I said, even like Alex Mack, The Secret World of Alex Mack, and like, you know, different kind of shows of that nature. But there's plenty they could have picked from. If they wanted kind of more obscure, weird stuff, like they could have talked about space cases or things. But I have a feeling some of that was probably based on the interviews that they were able to get. Although they do get more people than you would expect, especially like I said, like kind of more behind the scenes stuff. I think if they could have gotten even more interviews, it would be great. But even still, I really enjoyed what this documentary was for what it was. The interviews that they got, talking to people like Danny Tamborelli about Pete and Pete and stuff like that, shows that I love, that I grew up with, and honestly, a lot of shows that don't get as much like attention nowadays. Yes, I mean, of course, the Nicktoons are very marketable, and they've, you know, stuck around. Rugrats and Doug, and those are characters people remember. But also, a lot of the channel was formed by some of those like other live action shows, like The Adventures of Pete and Pete, which holds up as a fantastic kind of surreal, awesome show, or Secret World of Alex Mack, or some of the other ones that they talk about, of course, that had an influence. And so I really dug that this wasn't just dedicated to the greatest hits, so to speak. I like that they took the time to talk about everything about the channel. But as a documentary where I just wanted it to be an all-encompassing, you know, the best Nickelodeon documentary there could be, it does fall a little short because I really wish there was like a 3-4 hour cut of this documentary talking about everything, all the ins and outs. That being said, if you are a huge 90s Nickelodeon fan and you haven't checked this documentary out, or you haven't heard of it or anything like that, do yourself a favor. Check it out. But that being said, if you want to see some more Nickelodeon material, check out some of the other videos I have on this channel. I'll leave some links in the description below for my Fright Films episode on the creepiest episode of Hey Arnold, so with my Fright Films episode on Zeke the Plumber. There's all kinds of other stuff too if you want to check out some of my other Nickelodeon reviews, like Are You Afraid of the Dark, where I did a drawing episode where I drew creepy versions of Nickelodeon characters or cartoon characters in general. Check those out. Also, if you want to see more stuff like this, check out my Impromptu reviews, all kinds of things on this channel. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.